Well, thank you everybody for coming. Welcome to Creative Alliance. For those of you that have not been here before, my name is Thomas James. I'm the visual arts curator here. For those of you that don't know, Creative Alliance is a multidisciplinary arts nonprofit. We have exhibitions in our 2 galleries. We have performances in this theater. We have 8 artists in residency that live upstairs. A few of them I see right here. I'm glad to see that. And then we do work within Baltimore City schools, and we have many adult and kid workshops here. This place is bursting with programs every day of the week, almost every day of the week. So I want to encourage everybody to come back. But again, thank you all for being here. Can we just get a quick round of applause for Derrick Adams? I know this is why you all are here. So we are here today to talk about Baltimore's Emergence. So if you all don't know about Derrick Adams, if you like, I'm just gonna run down your resume a little bit. It's like someone.
Do a speed.
I got you.
Yeah.
So Baltimore-born but New York-based artist Derrick Adams, based in Brooklyn, whose critically admired work spans painting, collage, sculpture, performance, video, and sound installation. Received his MFA from Columbia, BFA from Pratt. Yeah. Recipient of, well, I can't even, this is like,
it don't matter.
You have so many, like,
so many. Skip all that.
Skip all that. All right, well,
Yeah,
just if you go to derrickadams.com and you just like scroll, you'll just keep finding all these accomplishments. So basically what I'm saying is humbled and happy to have you here speaking with us tonight.
I'm happy to be here. My hometown. I love Baltimore.
So speaking of your hometown, I kind of want to go back to when we first met at your show at Baltimore City Hall, curated by Kirk Shannon Butts. Was where I'm from, Derrick Adams. And I kind of want you to, can you talk to the crowd about why it was important for you to have that show at Baltimore City Hall?
Well, when I was invited to do an exhibition at the City Hall Gallery, I was really excited, mostly because it felt more like a coming home of sorts. Because when I was younger, I was part of a citywide art contest, and I won an award, and my work hung in the mayor's office when I was thinking about 9 or 10. And so when I got the call for the invitation, I automatically thought about that experience and how, sharing these paintings that I had finished before I was even invited to do the exhibition, I felt the paintings of my family photo album were the most appropriate thing to show. And also, I think coming from Baltimore at a time where I started making work in the 90s and then moving to New York, I always felt that just the spirit of the city was such a humble city that I always thought about, like, the idea of showing in a museum, although I have since then have been less of my goal, more than connecting with people who don't really see art as much. So I thought the City Hall was like an interesting place where people have to walk through anyway to get to where they have to go, and to have the experience with art, just by chance, I felt was more impactful from my experience growing up here in Baltimore than the museum. Because even when I was a kid, I never went to BMA. I didn't go to BMA until I was like 30 years old. I drove by it many times with my family, and my family, have been very, supportive of creative culture, but the museum as an institution was never like a thing. It was always just a building with an art museum.
So what was that like growing up here as an artist in Baltimore before you left for New York?
Well, for me, I was fortunate to have, again, creative support through family, but also just my peers who were here. Most weren't artists, but they appreciated art. But for me, it was really more about just the community of artists. And some of you guys know Bashi Rose.
Yeah.
So when I was here, before I moved to New York, Bashi and I, who, one of my good friends, he opened a vegetarian restaurant. And it was like a little thriving little scene going on when I was here before I moved to New York. He opened up a restaurant, I think, where Everyone's Place is on North Avenue, around there.
Okay.
Some of you guys may know what it is. He opened a vegetarian restaurant, and I had work in there, and we had poetry and like kind of a lot of community things, and we were really young at the time, but it was really less about the opportunity of like a commercial experience and more about just sharing what we had in common, which was this interest of being very aware of the community and very giving to, present what we know. So it was like a great experience just from a grassroots level. I didn't even think about a career. I knew I was an artist, but I never thought about the professional part of what that meant at the time living in Baltimore. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of staying on the same path of being in Baltimore, this being your hometown, why has it been so important for you now to come back and invest your time and resources into the city?
Mainly because when I was here as a young artist, there was not a real advancement in the arts other than the community part, that we were able to, support each other, but just financially, it was not considered a lucrative occupation. And most people who were making art, who I knew, who were here, were constantly on the grind and doing things that they had to do to continue their art practice, which was not necessarily a negative. It was just something where at the early age, I wanted more advancement, more challenges, more different scenery, and I had to leave. But now that I think things have kind of shifted globally with access to audience through internet and things like that, I just became really interested in this experience that I've had and the opportunity that I've had outside of Baltimore and the visibility that I've had to kind of bring that visibility to, or at least direct that visibility to the talent that's here in Baltimore right now, and being able to the best thing about being an artist or being a successful artist is being able to point to other people. It's not going to really deflect from your attention. It's only going to make you look better, I think.
It's interesting that you say that, because I know that you have referred to yourself as a facilitator. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means to you?
Well, for me, it's really, when you're at a certain level, I think as a professional, it's, you start to really look around at the table and you start to see your peers and different people who are around you. But you also, for me, it's really more about not being the only person not being the head person at the table. And again, using the opportunity to direct other people's attention to other artists or other creative people, and to somehow link them together to kind of figure out what's missing or what can be joined or what could be introduced. And so I really enjoy doing that. And it's not something that is a lot of effort for me. It's just more about the idea of giving myself even more space to continue to be creative. And I do it for that reason as well. It also creates less attention on me if I'm the target person, and giving more attention to other people, because as you're making work, if you're an artist, you've been making work for a while and you haven't had that much exposure, you basically need it, at some point, some acknowledgement, or at least some type of dialogue with other people outside of your comfortable community of people. So for me, it's really more about just helping to make connection with people, so it feels good to, it's just a thing that it's something I never really thought that much about. Like, it's not even something I worked on, or it's just part of my personality. I don't really think it's, people who don't do it, I think you should practice it. But for me, it's just a way of creating a legion of people versus one leader.
I think that speaks to what, and the first time I heard you talk about it probably was on Local Color with Jason was
Yeah.
the residency program and retreat, an artist retreat that you are creating. And so can you talk to us a little bit about why bringing artists to Baltimore for a residency and having something like that here, why that is so important?
Well, I strongly believe that there's already a community here of artists, younger artists who are joined and supportive, but I also think that there is also a possibility for other forms of engagement by bringing artists and other creative people from outside of Baltimore into Baltimore to meet some of the younger artists here, because I'm feeling strongly about the idea of artists kind of staying in their hometown. Mainly, you know, if you have the desire to be here and not want to leave, I think that some artists are inspired by their surroundings and moving to a place where, you know, a place like New York or LA, if you're not from those towns, could take you away from your daily inspiration, you know, which happens to be like your area of your studio, the people you're talking to. So, you know, for me, it was really the idea for this retreat residency space was really to bring artists here who live in Baltimore, who want to stay in Baltimore, to the space, and bring other people from outside of the city into the city to engage in conversation and opportunities that could allow artists to still profit off of their talent by maybe having shows outside of Baltimore, selling work to collectors outside of Baltimore, but still being able to benefit on some buying property in Baltimore, having a big studio in Baltimore, and still be able to travel around the world and exhibit. You know, because again, Baltimore is a place that's very centrally located, and I don't think it's at this particular point, you don't have to leave here to be successful. You just have to be able to expand your audience from here, and I think that that's an easier possibility now, more so than when I was a young artist.
Mm-hmm. So you spoke about being here in Baltimore and having artists staying here. What are some, I mean, you kind of already spoke about it, but can you give us some specific benefits that you see to staying specifically here in Baltimore for these emerging artists?
Well, the cost of living is cheaper. That's number one. Space is more available. Studio space is more available here. You're able to, you know, to be in a space that's not as congested with distractions, you know, and things that for some artists is really beneficial to their production. And there's some artists who can work more productively in a more fast-paced city, but that's not for everyone. And I think that now we're starting to realize that, and realizing also that it's okay to be that type of artist. You just got to figure out how to advance your audience from a space like this, which requires help, and requires someone like me or someone who is connected to an audience outside of Baltimore to give some visibility to what's happening in the city. And I think that's what is needed more so than artists leaving. And I think there have been quite a few artists who are friends of mine who are from Baltimore who live in LA, and like Shanique Smith and Clifford Owens, and those artists who are also close friends that had the same challenges that I had being here in Baltimore, and the reason why they left was similar to why I left. But they also understand that Baltimore is experiencing a very positive shift in the generation that exists now, creative generation, and that there's a lot of benefits, which we always believed Baltimore had this creative spirit, but it was not a city that supported art collectively. I mean, there were pockets of support from different places, but not a citywide support. And I think by bringing other people here, because there's a curiosity about the city right now too. When you travel around the world, people are very interested in Baltimore. And when I was mentioning to one of my friends, who's an artist in Berlin, who's a really well-known artist, and I told him what I was doing here in Baltimore. He was like, "Can I come? I always wanted to go to Baltimore, man. I want to come to Baltimore." And I'm like, "Oh, you know about Baltimore?" And he's like, "Yeah, I mean, I would love to come to Baltimore and work on a project or something like that." So I think that I think it's just a perfect time right now to really bring people here, to have people who come here to engage with artists here. Like bringing an artist from Berlin here might be very beneficial to someone who want to go to Berlin, and those things like that. So I think bringing people here and having them engage with the artists and the talent here will definitely bring the idea of support to the surface, and so it won't be so sporadically structured, but it'll be something that's evenly distributed.
I like how you're speaking about how the environment can affect the artwork and how artists are working. And so I kind of want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the work that's being created. So we see a lot in your work. There's this normalcy or mundanity in a lot of the images that you create. And in this show, we see that a lot through whether that's Jarrell's work or Amani's work or Yo, who has the swimming pool piece. So I kind of want to ask you why you feel that is so important to have, to create that sort of, to have that in your work.
Well, I think, first, that type of work from Black artists is very rare, because when we were going through the institutional experience, we always expected to kind of speak for everyone through your work. But and sometimes that jeopardizes the formal growth that you have as an artist, because it kind of makes it more challenging for people to critique your work on the formal aspect when the content is overpowering the ability to make something well. And I'm a really strong believer that there's a lot of talent within the Black American community, and always has been. In Baltimore, I felt it has always been a very uneven support system for the Black artists here in the city, as well as the white artists too. This is not a commercial-driven city, but the Black artists just have never, based on their family structure and the things that exist within the community, art has never really been fully supported, or idea of it. It is not because family don't want you to be an artist, they just don't see the, like, how you gonna live? How you gonna eat? That type of mentality when it comes to art. So for me, I'm really interested in allowing artists or thinking or promoting the idea from young Black artists to make work about their lived experience, and also understand that experience as a subject matter can be rooted to anything in art history. Like, it's not just about being a contemporary artist and making work about lived experience. The subject matter itself is something that could be in conversation with Western art as well as African art, or whatever type of art you want to make. And I think that becomes more of a radical experience for the viewer to see the Black subject in its own space, not compared to whiteness, not compared to oppressive structures, things that people think that we think about all the time, and we don't. We enjoy our family, we enjoy experiences with our family, we think about it, but sometimes because of the structure of society, even within the art world or even art school, we aren't encouraged to just make work about things that we really just want to make work about. And I think those things are radical. And I think that if you see a figure, like for instance in my work, some people relate my work to positive work or joyful work. But the reason why people say that is because they're not used to seeing the Black subject in a joyful representation. And to me, I think that is the issue that we should be talking about, that to make a Black subject in leisure or having a good time is considered positive work in comparison to what? And I think we have to take on that for ourselves and start making what we want versus what is dictated to us. And people like that, because that's all we're going to give them. If they, if artists want to speak on things that are more politically focused, I think that's also important for us to do. And I think that we should be able to make whatever we want to make. And I think it should be a large range of things to show the complexity and the dimensionality of our culture, which is a bunch of different things. And so I'm really excited to see how the young artists' works have developed, and how broad the conversation in their art has shifted. Because again, I like artists who are making what they want to make, be it politically, literally focused, or the figure in leisure, which also I think is equally political. So I think both things are very political. And I think we should start talking about them in a political manner, because perseverance is very political, and the fact that we can laugh, and the fact that we can have joy in the face of adversity should be talked about. And I think that, to me, is the most important thing about what can happen with young artists today, and and the power you have to push along narratives that are not explored as much.
Speaking of pushing things forward, you are a multidisciplinary artist, and we see that in this show as well. And I've heard you speak to artists, young artists, and encourage them to continue to explore their current mediums or trying something new. Can you kind of talk about why you encourage that sort of exploration, even if it might be something completely new for one artist or another?
I mean, this term, social practice, which is a pretty branded term now, I really feel, growing up in Baltimore and other cities that have a more working class community, social practice has always been in place. And social practices means that people get together, they bring the best of what they have to a space, and they share it. And all the exhibitions I experienced as a younger artist were those type of exhibitions where someone brought food, someone played music, someone hung up art. There were things happening that were engaging with the community. The community was welcome to come. They experienced things freely. They talked about things that were topical in conversation, and it was very much about this social exchange. And to me, I think that's what I think about when I think about art, and what art could be. I don't really think of art as being just painting or sculpture or photography or one thing or another. I think it really has to do with the ability to connect through various means of output. And photography has a very institutional way of looking and reflecting, and so does painting, and so does sculpture, so does sound. And I like to use the language that has been established with various creative output to talk about things that are more effective in that state versus another state. Some things are better as a photograph, some things work better as a painting, some things work better as experience as sound. And so I'm okay with that. I'm less interested in the perfection of a craft,
For sure. And I kind of want to shift gears again with you. So I was speaking with Kayla Fryer, who's in this show, and she was also in the Art World show at Maryland Arts Day in Annapolis earlier this week. And we were talking about balancing her working with her job and fellowships and things, and then also painting. And she was saying, I love painting and I want to paint all the time, but the work that I'm doing is so important. Outside, I want to make these programs and put them in place for the youth and things like that. And I immediately thought of you because you have run galleries and given many artists opportunities, and whether that was their first shows or putting them in group shows, and you're an educator as well. And so I wanted to get your take and hear why you value and partake in these positions that are creative but also administrative.
Well, I wouldn't do it if I thought other people were doing it, because I would rather just make art.
Right.
But again, I kind of go back to the idea that I don't want to be the only one enjoying benefits of being creative. And so with that in mind, I feel more driven to fill in blanks in certain areas. I always knew I was going to be an artist. I always felt like I was an artist. I always considered myself an artist. And although I would, when I was working in a nonprofit gallery, I was a curator in Chelsea for a while, and I've done other things with artists. I remember some of my friends, when things happened positively, or artists or whoever would say, I think you're a curator. I think that's your thing. And I was like, no, I'm an artist. And maybe because I'm doing it so well that you think that that's what I want to do. But I think an artist should know better of what another artist wants than a curator who's not an artist. Because an artist knows exactly what their expectation of what they want. There's some curators like you who are a little bit more sensitive and also part of the community of artists that you're representing. But I think artists, because of the nature of who we are, we have certain goals and expectations of having an exhibition. And if you are an artist and you're working with artists, you probably have a better gauge of personality, ego, and things that are more reflective of who you are, as well as the people that you're helping. So I just enjoy doing it only because I felt like with all the things I was doing as an artist, it was only, as a curator, as administrator, it was only going to help me when I became a more successful artist to deal with people who are in those roles when I'm doing exhibitions in galleries and museums. And it did actually benefit me a lot because, I started to, get things, deadlines where, I was able to accomplish deadlines in a faster pace than most of my peers, or do things in a more democratic manner because of my experience as an administrator. Like when I have an exhibition at a nonprofit space, I'll ask them, what is your budget? Like I don't want to go out, a lot of artists spend a lot of money having a show in a nonprofit space, and then they're like, I don't have any more money. And I'm like, don't do that. I mean, you can ask, do you have a budget? Do you have an honorarium? And they say yes or no, and then as much, like you maybe do some work on paper, or you might do something, a video projection. I mean, I'm really a strong believer, again, in like, what do you want to talk about? Like, does it have to be a painting? I think if you're a really good artist and you're really connected to conversations about art and about social structure, you can develop your ideas through a lot of different things. The main thing is thinking about what your work is really about. And if you have a show that you don't have money to produce a show, then you should do something based on what you physically can do. And so from working in a nonprofit gallery, I learned that. I met a lot of artists who spend a lot of money not paying their rent, doing the show. They think they're going to sell something. It doesn't sell. They're upset, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is a nonprofit gallery. You probably won't sell anything. And I started telling artists that in the beginning of the process, because I had experience with artists before that, that was disappointing because they thought something was going to come out of it that didn't. And so I keep those things in mind as an artist now, and I try to adjust my expectation to the things that are more practical. And I learned that from working as an administrator.
I appreciate what you said, and especially bringing up my position as a curator and being part of the artist community, so that we would know what artists are looking for, what to expect, things like that. But one of the things that has been coming up a lot, especially with younger artists that I've been working with, is education. So whether that is debating whether or not they should get a PhD or become an educator, they may have offers and things like that. You are an educator, and you have been for a while. So I want you to talk about the potential benefits of not only being a student that has gone through the process, but also on the other side of actually being an educator. And those you can answer whenever you want.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I talk about it all the time with younger artists now. There's a lot of artists who are contemplating going to grad school or not going to grad school. And I think you have to really think about what are your expectations as an artist to how far you want to go. And you could sell work without having a master's degree. You could have gallery representation without having a master's degree. But for me, I always thought about having the most credentials I can get as an artist, like any other profession. Like a doctor goes to school for a certain amount of time before they become a certified doctor and become more informed than someone who just took a course in medicine. I think the same thing with artists. I think that being in grad school and doing residencies really open the possibilities of what can happen for you as an artist, because it really takes about 20 years to be an established artist. You know, when you don't go to art school and you are around just your peers, you will not get the truthful response to your work all the time. It's just by nature, your friends are going to tell you things in a certain way in order to deal with you as a friend. But for me, I went to grad school because I was showing already. I had a friend group of artists who were supportive, and I wanted to jump into another space that was not my friends, people who didn't care anything about me other than just talking about my work. And for me, grad school was exciting because I had a whole group of new eyes and new conversations, and established artists who were paid to come and talk to me in my studio on a daily basis. And those same artists I'm still friends with. A lot of my professors in grad school at Columbia, I have lunch with them. I go to their kids' birthday parties. We created a network that's beyond the network that was around me in my peer group. I actually was able to advance my network of people just by going to grad school and meeting people I didn't think I necessarily would think I would be friends with, based on the level of comfort I was before I went to grad school. So I definitely think that is important. But what I think is really important moving forward when you think about grad school, I think we're at a place right now where it's less about going to a Ivy League grad school, and it's really more about who's there. That's the most important thing about grad school now. It's not about going to Yale or Columbia or any of those schools. It's about who's the faculty. Who will you be talking to when you get there? That's the most important thing about grad school right now. Where you go does not mean the same as who's going to be there to assist you in your development. And that's the most important thing. A lot of, if you're making a particular type of work, it's probably important to talk to someone or be around people who can help to push that through on both a formal level as well as a context level. And that's where I think is the advancement of being an artist now. Because if you so happen to want to teach, you're going to need a master's degree, and you get paid more when you do. You get paid more, and you rarely have to apply at a certain. When you're an artist who is exhibiting and you have a master's degree and they call you to teach, you really don't have to do that much. You don't have to go through the whole process of being interviewed and things like that. They'll call you and say, "We want to give you this job. I know you have." They already know what you have. They know you have a master's degree. They know you've been showing. So you're there to bring visibility to their school. So they want you, and whatever the highest scale of whatever they pay for being there, you're going to get paid that. Because you don't need to be there if you are doing the things outside of teaching. If you're exhibiting or have a gallery, the master's degree on top of that will only help to get you what you want.
Speaking of moving forward, I want to kind of circle back to Baltimore as a city. There are a lot of organizations and individuals out here that are doing a lot of good work. Whether that's in press, publication, or places I'd like to say like Creative Alliance. So but can you speak to the audience about some organizations or individuals and other folks that you've seen that are doing things the right way, and that if anyone is out here in the crowd that may want to start a publication or a small organization or something like that, maybe they want to base their research off of?
The greatest thing, what's exciting right now for me, I've lived away for a long time, and I've been coming to Baltimore more often in the past couple of years. I've gotten to learn a lot more about the city, and I've learned a lot about what's happening in the city. Enjoy at Wallet Gallery, who I think is a great space, doing really interesting things. I think there is a lot of possibility within the art scene here because of the economic structure and the ability to do something on a very, modest level. And my family, they're really, they're, when I think about what I've been able to achieve and what I've seen in response to my environment, my sister, Victoria Burney, who's here, Kennedy not Burney, Victoria Kennedy. She has Zora's Den, which is the Black Writers Workshop, and it does the thing at UB Blake. And then my nephew, Lawrence Burney, who has True Laurels, the publication that is really cool. And so they've kind of been exposing me to what's happening in Baltimore, because it's new to me. Just what I'm experiencing now is new. Like, it wasn't here when I was here. Like, a lot of things that are existing now, like, I probably would have never left if it was like jumping like this. When I was in my 20s, it was not. We did a lot of things in our apartment. A lot of exhibitions we had, we would clear out our apartment and put up art and have an art exhibition. That was the way we did it when I was here. And everyone would come, it would be so packed in our apartments. And people would come and we would, have a whole thing going on with food and artwork on the wall. And some people were here remember that. And that was a scene, that was a gallery. We would have people, and it was usually audiences from, like, Morgan would come, friends who went to Morgan, friends who went to UB. Not very little people we knew from Micah. I was only there, did a semester there. But it was just people interested in the community of creativity. And they were there just because their friends who were artists would have an art opening, and they would come to our apartments and just look at art. So the established structure, like Creative Alliance and things that are happening that I think are amazing, are, again, something that I'm just learning about every time I come back, just like City Hall Gallery. Like, that didn't exist when I was a kid. When I was even in my 20s, they didn't have a gallery or exhibitions that I knew of where you can go look at art. So I think what's exciting is that there's so much opportunity in places that are very interesting. It's not just art in a very white box structure. It has a whole other programming around these spaces that makes it equally interesting.
So I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience in a minute. So if you all have questions, please write them down, just so you don't forget them. But one of the most important things, I think, for emerging artists is to hear from people like you who have put in the work, and they look to people like you for guidance and things like that. And sometimes something that you or someone like you might say might go a long way for one of these younger artists. So I want to hear from you. Can you tell us a piece of advice or a tidbit that you may have gotten from a mentor or someone who you looked up to when you were younger that helped you moving forward? If you did receive it, I don't know.
I really didn't receive anything that was that memorable, but I grew up in church, and I always remember I had an uncle who, or a phrase that people would say, they would say, "Do as I say, not as I do." I always thought the other way. I always observed what people do, and I paid more attention to what they do versus what they say. And what they do was more of my way of understanding who they are versus what they told me.
Seeing how they move and things.
Yeah, and so I think that has always been one of the things that really stuck with me just as a creative person, but also realized just from working, I always have this thing that I tell people all the time. I said, if you are ready, you don't have to get ready. And that's what happens when I think about what art. Like, if you don't have to have a space to create a solo show. You just have to have space in your head to create a solo show. And that's the most important thing. And I think that every time you make work, you should be making work with that in mind. Everything you make should be almost like a thesis every time you create a body of work. Don't think about it as having an opportunity first in order to make you excited about what you're doing. Make the whole show, document the whole show, wrap up the whole show, and store it. And and when people come along and they see what you're doing, they're going to be way more surprised, and they will take you in a totally different way if their show is already done. You had time to edit things out. You know what a good show would look like. You're presenting the work, you know. And I think that's the most important thing, I think, when you think about the generation that we're in right now, because a lot of younger artists wait for the opportunity before they start making the work. But the best thing to do is to make the work like the old guys used to do. You know, the old artists, male and female, you know, especially artists who are not in the mainstream art world, they made work for like 40 years and no one really bought that work. They kept making because they realized that they have to make art. That's part of who they are, and regardless of getting exposure or not, you still have to do what you do as an artist. And you should make art as if someone will come at some point and you better be ready, you know, because it might be that time, and you know, it might be a time where somebody call you and say, you know, the gallery you want to show with might call and said, oh, this artist canceled, and could you have a show in 2 weeks? And you know, if you're not ready, then you'll be like, oh, I got to make this work, and you cannot make a good show in 2 weeks. You just can't, especially if you're a young artist. You can make a show, but it's not going to be your best show in 2 weeks. But if you're making work already and it's done, and someone calls you and say, let's do a show, you already know the work is in storage. It's been photographed. You can start the press early. You can do, you know, you can have images already on the website. You know, this thing that you can do on your own before you've even been invited to do anything. Like you should be your own archivist. And you know, as an artist, you have to really start thinking about yourself as being relevant without necessarily having the approval of a commercial gallery or institution. You have to believe that if this is what you're going to be doing, you need to take it serious, and you really need to start documenting everything you do as a form of understanding your trajectory and how, you know, where you come from, where you're going. It's a way of kind of keeping a journal, and that means it's archiving what you do and kind of building shows. You know, you can make 4 solo exhibitions, you know, and put them away. You know, you can do it without thinking about a gallery. You can just think that I have these shows, and when the opportunity presents itself, I'll be prepared to do the show, and that's important.
Hey, these are gems right here. You all like. All right, so can we get a little more light so I can see in the crowd? I want people to like raise their hands. Yes. Thank you. All right. Does anyone have questions for Derrick? Can you raise your hand? I can call on you if you're. Yes, right here.
Kind of a comment / question.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you spoke about the curator and the artist and how they can do things, share resources, and open doors for other artists. But the one element I didn't hear mentioned was the collector / custodians. And I feel like they have a huge responsibility in the art world too. And it's like right now, it's like everyone wants to consume and buy as much as they can and have it, you know, appreciate. But how do we change the paradigm and have them act more as custodians, where they're supporting and making the spaces and environment and using their resources to help the artists, you know, have a space to show and grow.
You want me to answer that, or you want Thomas to answer that? Or both of us?
Both, yeah.
Well, I think that when you think about curation, collectors or people who collect art, you really can't necessarily control, because the people are just, art becomes a luxury item outside of your studio. So unless the collector is interested in acquiring the work in order to cultivate a scene, it has to start with the collector being interested in maybe joining museum groups or other younger collector groups that talk about the importance of being a collector. But also, when you start thinking about the price range of art and how it goes up and down, how it fluctuates, then people, are encouraged to buy art for the sake of advancing financially and being able to trade it. That's something that's happening a lot with younger artists, even more so now. And those things you really can't control, but if you have people who are collectors, or people interested in collecting, if you're an artist and you know people who are younger, you should tell them to join a group, join like a young collectors group, join like art appreciation groups, because that's the way that people become more exposed to artists by going to their studios with groups of people, talking to artists like this about art. That's the way that we can actually encourage a certain understanding of art. But just the culture of collecting is just about consuming, and it's about taste. It's about things that are reflective of the person who's buying it, to show to people who observe it that this is what is representative of who I am and things that I like. And I think that we have to be very careful not to give collectors too much power, because then they're going to dictate to us in the schools what art is valuable versus what is not. So we can't necessarily look at collectors as the leaders of what art is, because that has to do with commerce. And so we have to show people that even if you don't buy my work, I'm still going to make this work. And I'm not going to make what you think is the most popular work because you have a whole house full of it. Collectors should never be the most valuable people in the room when you think about art. If anything, they're the luckiest people in the room, because they get to have a one of a kind from one person and be able to cherish it forever. And if they're lucky, it might be the most important piece that they have in that collection. And so they actually are more of luck that they have the work versus you being lucky as an artist that someone's buying your work. It is not even about an ego. It's the fact that you've made something that's precious, and if it's destroyed, you can't replace it. And so this person is buying it that's priceless to have something, make something like that, and to put it out there like that. And for someone to buy it, they become like the guardian of that. It's like a gift to them. So I think that's where we should leave them, in that place, versus lifting them to another place. And collectors are important because it advances your practice. But if you're going to make an art, you're going to make art regardless of a collector or not. If collectors are the reason why you're making art, then maybe you shouldn't be making art.
And I think to also speak to the other side of your question, which is, how to advance, aside from collectors. I mean, there are, especially here in Baltimore, we have a ton of organizations that are specializing in assisting artists in one way or the other. And, I was just talking to someone about this the other day, that, and so let's say there is a collector who is known to get these works, and they might be downsizing, a home or something like that. They're like, well, I'm not collecting art anymore, I don't have any space. You might be able to talk to that person and figure out a different way to support an organization. Say, hey, you can join this board, or you can get with this organization and you can support a grant.
Yeah.
So when artists,
you need more of that. You need more people who are willing to not have anything, being able to assist without getting something from it. You know what I'm saying? That's what we need. We need more people who may not want to buy art, but they want to help artists. So when you do a residency, you don't have to give them a piece of art. You should be able to do the residency. Just for a person who's believed that art is important and everyone should have access to it, and artists should have a space to create or just relax, and not that I want something because I'm giving you money. That's what we need, more of that, and less of, the power of a collector.
And whether you're an artist, a curator, an arts admin, or just an arts advocate, we need more of that. Where we are our best selling tools, if you will. So, if I'm going to someone who I know has the capacity and the resources to support the arts, that becomes my responsibility to go to that person and say, hey, let's figure something out, let's work together. This is what art is important, this is why it's important, I think you have the capacity to support it, let's do something. All right, any another question? Yes. Oh, you came all the way to the front, you're like, I need this question answered.
Yeah. I met you at...
Yeah, from Devon, Morris.
Yeah, I met you at... the youth workshop at the organization where you were from, and you told me to talk heights, but I still just want to ask another question kind of similar to that.
Yes.
And tell me what the beginning was like for you.
Well, I grew up in Park Heights, and which was a great experience. A lot of exposure to a lot of different things, and I always laugh because moving to New York, people would say, I remember one time I was in a residency and someone was like, "You seem like a Huxtable." And I was like, "No, I grew up in Park Heights. You got to come to Park Heights, you know." But I think that for me, growing up in Baltimore is very much part of my empowerment, the way I see myself, the way I see the importance of what I do as an artist. Growing up in Baltimore was never like, I wasn't going to art school, but I was the friend who would have a drawing pad or something. I would be drawing all the time, or drawing or sketching, or I was known as the artist friend in my group of friends. So I never thought that I would be a professional artist, or not that I didn't think I wasn't going to be, but that was not something that, when you're a kid, you're growing up in the city, you're not thinking like, I'm going to be an artist, professional artist when I grow up. I like making art. Or you don't even understand what that really means to be like an artist. But I was known for that person. So even throughout my whole life, whatever I did, any type of group of friends I had hanging out from my early years to even the time before I left, I rarely hung out with artists collectively. I have artist friends who are spread out, but I never had, not only until I left Baltimore, I ended up becoming good friends with some artists you guys might know, Tony McKissick, who was here. He's a good friend of mine. And another artist, Terrence Boncole, who was here. He's moved. And those are my friends right before I left to go to New York. But growing up in Baltimore, I was just known to be this guy who made art, made drawings of people, and so it was never like it was never really a crazy challenge to be an artist. It was something that was just not, it was no reference, it was no reference to think like you can't do it or you can do it. It was just never a thing, it was just like like I said, I never went to the museum until I left, and I would go to museums when I went to Pratt. But it was never as hard as some people would imagine, because some people send me messages sometimes and say, "Wow, man, you really made it, from Park Heights to blah, blah, blah." I'm like, I knew I was going to do something. I didn't know I was going to, like, what is making it? I don't even know what you're talking about. It's just more about just staying focused and knowing that you have something to contribute, and then that thing could manifest into something one day, and sometimes it could be fast or it could be slow. But I never felt like I was on hard times and I like rose from the ashes to be an artist. No, I was just, in Baltimore, middle class working people, most people work at for the government or the state or the city, family members, and I'm from that. I'm from people who work every day, and I end up doing something that is, unexpected for someone who grew up in an environment where people believe that you have to put a certain amount of time in to get something. And I'm doing the same thing, but I'm doing it for myself, which is very different than working for someone else. So if anything, I've learned how to be a good entrepreneur. But I'm still using the same ethics and focus as my family in their 9 to 5. I put that same work into my studio.
Well said.
Was that good enough?
In the back? Yes.
I actually have 3 questions, but you can
Rasheen,
answer as little as, you don't have to answer all 3, you can just answer 1 or 2 or 3. So the first one is about, have you seen successful models of increasing access and opportunity for emerging artists that happen on a very consistent basis? The other one is how to make, you mentioned art as a luxury outside of your studio. How do you make that more accessible without commodifying it? And the last one is how to get access to larger platforms that have gatekeepers that don't necessarily see the value in your work because they're not within your community.
Oh, start that one over again, because
A
what's the
lot-
first
a
one?
lot
I
of
was like, I didn't write that
access
down.
questions.
What's the first one? The first one was.
Again, you don't have to answer already.
No, I want to.
Okay. So the first one is, have you seen successful models for increasing access and opportunity to emerging artists that are like consistent and sustainable over time? So like not one-off, but they are consistently increasing access and opportunity to artists who are like emerging right now.
I think, if anything, we're seeing artists and community organizers and organizations help artists to categorize themselves in relationship to what benefits could help them to advance. You know, there's some artists who are not commercially focused artists, and so you may need to write grants to do things you want to do, because the things you're doing may not necessarily be financially lucrative to someone who want to support it. And I think that now we're at a place where artists actually understand what type of artist they are now, or the idea of what type of artist is a little bit more distinguishable now, because there are some artists who are focused on the market and making objects to sell, and that's okay. And there's some artists who are interested in making experiences through their art for the viewer that may not necessarily be financially viable for them to live, but they're able to maybe apply for things. And I think that's happening more in cities across the states. There's a lot of community, now that there's a phrase of social activism and things that are dealing with the community, now they're starting to understand, now they have a name, a face to the name, or the names to the face, as they say. Now we're starting to have categories of where, how you can get resources that were not available before, because there was no category for things that are happening. But also, when it goes to the market with younger artists, collectors usually follow the market. Like if people say that these artists are hot right now, and you start seeing your peers or younger artists selling work in galleries, you have to look at the type of galleries they're showing. If they're showing in a smaller galleries are usually the ones who are like feeders for bigger galleries. And so if they say like, Indian artists are hot right now, or black artists are hot right now, or white guys are hot right now, that's what people are going to start buying for the most part. And they're going to buy it because that's the trend of what's hot. And so people start buying that. They'll still have collectors who are consistent buying what they want, but the general population buy based on projections of what is a good investment. Because people who buy art, most of the people are financial people who support art. So that's what it's really about. But for you as a young artist, it's really interesting for you to observe what who you want to work with. Like if you are doing commercial work, you mean as an artist you want to work with a gallery. A lot of younger artists are like paying galleries rent. Younger galleries rent. So if there's a gallery that is showing a lot of artists who are very young, it's because the price point is lower, which means that younger artists probably have to work harder, and so you have to keep producing work, and you're encouraged to keep producing work, but you're actually carrying the institution or the space that you're exhibiting in. You actually are the financial structure of the space, and those things are important. And sometimes when those smaller galleries are showing, you look around and see the roster of artists and they happen to appear to be similar to you, it's not necessarily because they like those artists. They just like the fact that these artists are considered hot right now, and they have a clientele for these types of works. And so that's why the program has artists like you in the program. It's not because the gallery per se like artists like you. It's because they know that people are going to call them after they get the projection of what is hot. They're going to call them and ask them, do you have any of these artists that, at this particular price point? So our job is totally different than what their job is. But our job is to be observant of those things and be in control over how you're being consumed versus just going right into it, And I think I answered all of the questions. Yeah.
Do we have more questions? I saw some hand. Okay, I see one hand right here.
Yep. I just want to go back to the gentleman's question about collectors.
Mm-hmm.
You said at the end of your statement, Derrick, that you need more people that are just willing to be helpful. So, you know, from that perspective, what's the most organic and valuable way to be helpful to younger artists without expectation of anything in return?
Donate to Creative Alliance, to the Residency.
Yes. Yeah, round of
To the
applause,
Residency.
please.
I mean, that's what you do. You know, if you want to be, I mean, if you're that type of collector who is constantly giving money to organizations for nonprofit, you will get a lot of art from artists without even knowing you're getting art from artists, because that's how artists are. If you're looking out for the artists, they will look out for you. You don't have to have a, you know, one-to-one exchange. If you're doing things that are supporting the artist community, artists will gift you with a lot of things, things that are made just for you versus being made as an object to buy. And I think that's what's important about organizations like this. Like, you know, invest in the Residency, you know, invest in the exhibition program, or a talk, you know. You can sponsor a talk. It's things that you can do in a nonprofit, for nonprofit spaces that are very beneficial, because artists need space. They need space to develop their ideas, space to be in conversation with each other. That's what's really important, and those spaces are always in jeopardy. So that's what we need more. If you're buying work from the artist, you're just helping that artist. But if you're in a city like Baltimore and you really want to help cultivate a scene, then you can support the scene that is fostering and building the artist community. And that in turn would help you as a collector to be a part of something great. And in turn, you will probably be recognized by artists for that contribution, and, you know, and somehow, you know, appreciated in various ways within the community.